So get this, a massive legal challenge has just been filed in Brazil's highest court, and it pits a single lawyer against two of its own ministers. What's at the heart of all this? Well, it's one of the most fundamental rights we have in a democracy, the right to liberty. This petition argues that a whole bunch of citizens have been unlawfully detained under a really controversial investigation, and it's asking the court to take a hard look at its own actions.
Okay, so to really get what's going on here, we first have to understand the main legal tool being used. It's called a habeas corpus. Now I know, it's a Latin term, but what it stands for is an absolute cornerstone of modern law.
It literally translates to show me the body. Think of it as this incredibly important constitutional safeguard. It gives anyone who's been locked up the right to go before a judge and say, hey, why am I here? It forces the government to prove there's a good, lawful reason to be holding someone. You know, without this, there's nothing to stop arbitrary arrests.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Just look at the players here. You've got one lawyer filing this thing on behalf of a whole group of citizens who, by the way, are called patients in an habeas corpus. And the authorities are going up against? It's not the local police or some lower court. It's two sitting ministers of the Supreme Court itself. All right, so here's our game plan for breaking this down. We're going to set the stage, then we'll dive into the three main legal arguments in the petition. First, how this whole investigation even started. Second, who was picked to lead it. And third, what happened when the top prosecutor in the country tried to shut it down. And then, we'll see exactly what this petition is demanding the court do.
So this whole case, it all revolves around something called Inquiry 4.781, but you've probably heard of it as the fake news inquiry. It was kicked off back in 2019 to look into threats and disinformation aimed at the Supreme Court. But this petition, it's not just questioning one little arrest. No, it's challenging the entire legal foundation of the inquiry itself and everything that's happened because of it since day one. All right, let's get into the first big pillar of the argument. It attacks the inquiry right at its source. The petition claims it has what's called a vício de origem, which basically means an incurable, fatal flaw right from the very beginning. The argument is that the way this whole thing got started was just fundamentally unconstitutional.
Now, to get their point, you need to understand Brazil's accusationary system. The easiest way to think about it is like a triangle of justice. You've got the investigators, like the police, gathering the facts. You've got the prosecutors, who look at the facts and decide whether to accuse someone. And then you have the judge, who's supposed to be a totally neutral referee. The whole point is that these jobs have to be separate, so no one group has all the power. And that brings us right to the petition's core claim here, that the Supreme Court broke that triangle. They say the court started the investigation itself on its own behalf. This, they argue, completely violated that separation of powers because the court, which was the target of the so-called fake news, ended up being the victim, the investigator, and the judge, all rolled into one.
And to really hammer this point home, the petition pulls out this quote from a former Supreme Court minister's dissenting opinion. It's super simple, but it cuts right to the heart of the matter. The judge does not investigate, the judge judges.
Okay, so that was argument number one. But the petition doesn't stop with how the inquiry started. The next big argument is about who was chosen to run it. And this all centers on a constitutional idea called the natural judge.
The idea of a natural judge is actually pretty simple, but it's absolutely crucial for fairness. You can't have one side in a legal fight get to pick the referee, right? Of course not. A judge is supposed to be assigned randomly, through an impartial system like a lottery. The petition argues that's exactly what didn't happen here.
So the petition lays it out like this. First, the lead minister for the case was just appointed, handpicked by the court's president. It says this completely bypassed the normal random lottery system, which they claim is a violation of the court's own rules. And the result? A huge concentration of power. This one minister then automatically got assigned tons of related cases, creating this kind of snowball effect. And again, the petition uses the court's own words against it. They quote a sitting minister who warned that this exact practice could create a kind of universal judgment on certain topics, all piled up under a single justice, who wasn't even randomly assigned in the first place.
All right, on to the third and final key argument. And this one focuses on a really critical moment right at the beginning of the inquiry's life, a moment the petition paints as a major constitutional crossroads. And it all involves Brazil's top prosecutor. Now, to get this, we got to talk about the term dominus litis. It means master of the lawsuit.
In Brazil's system, the public prosecutor's office is the dominus litis. They, and only they, have the power to decide if a criminal case moves forward or if it gets shut down. The prosecutor is the one driving the car. A judge, according to this principle, can't grab the wheel and force a case to continue if the prosecutor wants to hit the brakes.
Just look at this timeline. It shows a total head-on collision. The inquiry gets created in March. Just 1 month later, the nation's top prosecutor at the time, Raquel Dodge, formally requests that it be shut down, arguing it was unconstitutional. But the petition highlights that this request from the person who's supposed to be the master of the lawsuit was denied by the court, and the inquiry has been going and growing ever since.
And then the petition uses the prosecutor general's own words from an interview she gave. She didn't just disagree. She basically drew a line in the sand, saying that this whole setup, a hand-picked judge investigating in secret without the prosecutor's involvement, is something you'd see in an old inquisitorial system, but it is completely at odds with the accusatory system that Brazil's constitution guarantees.
Okay, so after laying all of that on the table, the flawed origin, the hand-picked judge, the prosecutor's objection, what's the endgame? What is this habeas corpus actually asking the court to do about it?
Well, let me tell you, they are not asking for small changes. The demands here are sweeping. It calls for the complete annulment of Inquiry 4781 and every single investigation that grew out of it. It demands the immediate release of everyone who's been arrested. It wants the internal court rule used to start the whole thing declared unconstitutional. And finally, it asks for all these cases to be sent down to the regular lower courts to be handled the right way.
So, at the end of the day, what you're seeing here is pretty extraordinary. This petition is asking the entire Supreme Court to sit in judgment of its own members and to potentially tear down one of the most significant and far-reaching investigations in the country's recent history.
And the petition finishes its main argument in a really powerful way, not with a big statement, but with this open-ended question for the court. After arguing that this whole thing doesn't follow the rules of a normal investigation, it just asks, what is the legal nature of this proceeding? What is this thing? It's a question that basically dares the court to define the legality of its own actions, leaving this profound, complicated dilemma for Brazil's highest court to solve.